Space is a precious commodity and there's hardly enough for it to go around. So what happens if you plan an upcoming extension to your home or you need a new garage without space? Well, it may be time to buy land from your neighbor. Before anything else, you have to check if the plot is actually for sale. It may be worth having a conversation to see whether your neighbor would be open to an offer. During this stage, you also have to determine your property boundary and ascertain the true ownership of the plot of the land. If your neighbor is a tenant, it may be worth checking if you could buy their leasehold interest, or you could contact the owner to see if you could buy the freehold title. Speaking of the owner, if you're unsure of their identity, you can verify this through the HM Land Registry. For a small fee, they will check if the property is registered and identify who the registered owner is. If it's registered with the land registry and your neighbor is the registered owner, then you can proceed with buying the plot. But what if there are issues over who owns the area? The only thing you will need is documentation from your neighbor to prove that they actually own it. Once ownership is established, there are also a few things you must pay extra attention to. First, you have to determine if your neighbor has a mortgage on their property. If so, they'll need their lender's consent to release part of the property's land into your ownership. The decision usually depends on the land's value and how much remains on your neighbor's mortgage. The latter is crucial because you will need the lender to remove their interest over the land that you want to buy. There's also another issue when it comes to buying land from your neighbor, and that's the problem of a restrictive covenant. This means that there are legal restrictions in the property's title that will prevent or limit what you can do with it. For example, building additional buildings. Additionally, you may be buying an area that already has planning permission on it. If so, you will need to submit plans and go through the planning process. Then the local authority will take into account any objections from neighbors. Furthermore, if the land you are buying is in a conservation area, the council may need to give additional consent before you can even consider building on the plot. So it's always best to check with the local planning authority. Once you've got your heart set on making an offer, it's time to talk numbers. But how do you determine the value of the plot? For starters, you could contact an estate agent or a land valuer to help determine the price early on in negotiations. Take note that extra features and future development plans may drive prices up. After that, it's time to approach your neighbor, negotiate a price and draw up a plan that identifies the area. It's recommended to work with a surveyor who will take care of the details and also prepare the plan for the land registry. It's also at this point your neighbor may try to shoo in the aforementioned restrictive covenant. However, if all is well, then your solicitor will be able to arrange for you and your neighbor to sign the transfer and then complete the administrative tasks to complete the purchase. Usually you should be able to complete the entire process in under 2 weeks. Lastly, when buying land from a neighbor, our ultimate advice is to discuss the situation with your solicitor before starting the process. That's because someone with experience in buying and selling land will need to consider the practical issues such as planning permissions and rights of access before any contract is signed. Having an experienced solicitor by your side will make the process smooth and help you fulfill your hopes and ambitions for the plot afterwards.